Good evening. Welcome to Divine Speech in African Traditionalism. I am your host, Augustine Ayinibisah Ayelah. To seek permission to speak, I rise before my father and my mother. I rise before my grandfather and grandmother, whom I call my ancestors. I rise before the deities, the land deities, the water deities, and the sky deities. I rise before the goddesses and the gods. And finally, I rise before the Supreme Being, Amen-Re, whom my tradition calls Naiwene, to grant me strength and wisdom to conduct this interview with this learned man, so that we inform the general public without offending anybody. And with this prayer, I know I'm permitted to speak. My guest today is Mr. MILTON ALLIMADI. Mr. MILTON ALLIMADI is the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Black Star News, an African-centered newspaper in New York City. It is a newspaper that if you want to stay well informed, especially about Africa, you should read at all times. And not only Africa, it covers serious issues that affect our everyday lives. Mr. ALLIMADI, welcome to Divine Speech.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, my brother.
Please tell us about yourself, your newspaper, and your goal in publishing.
Well, briefly about myself. I grew up partly here in the United States. I grew up in Uganda, where I was born, where my late beloved parents came from. And I also grew up in Tanzania, where my family lived for about 10 years. And then I returned to the United States to go to college. I attended Syracuse University. I studied economics. And then I moved to New York City. And after working for a few years, I decided to go back to school.
Okay.
I went to Columbia University to study journalism. Because even as a young boy, I felt the urge to engage in journalism. Okay. Whenever I read something that I disagreed with, I would write a letter to the editor.
Right.
I think my first letter to the editor was published when I was 12 years old in Tanzania.
Okay.
At that time, the World Cup, which is a big thing around the world, and for all Africans, of course, only allowed the participation of one African country.
Right.
And even as a 12-year-old, I felt that that was wrong.
Something's wrong.
Yes, so I wrote a letter to the editor. That was published, and I think that was when I fell in love with the written word and with journalism. I founded the Black Star News in 1987. After working, in 1997.
Okay.
After working at the City Sun, which was a very popular weekly newspaper published by the late Andrew Cooper, focusing on investigative journalism and news that was very relevant to our African communities everywhere.
Right.
Whether the diaspora from the continent and sisters and brothers in this country. And before going to the City Sun, after finishing my journalism training at Columbia, I had worked for a few years. First, I did an internship with the Wall Street Journal, and then I was a freelance reporter for the New York Times.
Right.
But it was during that time that I really discovered the power and the influence of the City Sun. So I left the New York Times, and I joined the City Sun. Now, Mr. Cooper was a bit elderly at that time, and his health began to, he had adverse health impact.
Right.
And eventually when he passed away, the newspaper also ceased publication. But I had determined that I would never go back to the so-called corporate media.
Right.
So I wrote a business plan, and I started sending it out to people that I knew had money. People like, at that time, the big names were people like Michael Jordan, people, Oprah has always been big, and to Bill Cosby, and to many others. And eventually I got a letter from, actually I didn't even know it was from Cosby.
Right.
It looked like it was a bill, so I didn't open it for a few days. But when I opened it, to my pleasant surprise, it was actually a check from Camille and Bill Cosby. And that's how I got the seed money to start the Black Star News. And here we are today. You've already introduced the paper. You did an excellent job in explaining what kind of publication it is. We just hope for it to continue growing. And now with the internet, we can have our information read all over the world.
Good. How's your paper doing, and what is the circulation this year?
Well, it's been very tough. I will tell you quite honestly, because in the last 4 years, as you know, especially during the recession, there was no advertising, so we had to be very creative in terms of how to publish. We reduced the page size to the minimum count that we could, and we also reduced the print run, ranging from anywhere from 10, 15 to 20,000 a week, depending on what the advertising situation was. Thankfully, things are beginning to pick up a little, and I always tell my friends, how do I know that things are picking up? Because now when I open my drawers at home, I can find some change lying around. And this was not the case 2 years ago. Things were really bad.
Right.
Yeah. But now with the internet, it allows you to leverage your journalism, because the internet, you have different type of readers from all over the world, and if you can aggregate that traffic, that's an additional source of revenue through advertising. And increasingly, people are now shifting to the internet, as you know, and with the combining that with social media, that is where we are focusing now. I invite people to visit our website, blackstarnews.com, and then I invite them to visit again in about a month or so. By that time, we would have completed the complete redesign. Our website is going to be similar to, for example, if you went to CNN's website. That is the kind of website that we're going to have in about 6 weeks from now.
In about 6 weeks from now?
Yes.
Oh, that's excellent news.
Thank you.
As a political observer, because the writing or journalism, you can't escape that.
Of course.
What is your evaluation of President Barack Obama?
I think he works under very challenging circumstances. I think when obviously there was a great euphoria all over in the United States and on the continent when he was doing very well in the primaries, 2008, against eventually it was between him and Hillary Clinton. So when he prevailed and became the nominee, that of course was historic. The first African-American nominee of a major party, like a Democratic Party. So, and then of course the euphoria was even much more uplifting when he succeeded and he defeated John McCain. Now when you look back, you have to look at what were the expectations, and then you have to reconcile that with the reality. What could he have been able to accomplish? Because sometimes people tend to forget that you know, while you may be president, you still have to work with a Congress. So it became very obvious that from the very beginning, he met resistance. It was a combination of the Republican members of Congress, but also with the right-wing media. I remember even before he was sworn in, I think it was in December, when Rush Limbaugh, who, as you know, is one of the major purveyors, in my estimation, of hate journalism in this country, he said that I hope this president fail. This is before he had even been sworn in. And regrettably, that kind of sentiment became pervasive. Many Republican members of Congress took up that sentiment. And then we saw the rise of the Tea Party.
Right.
And some of the language they were using when they were coming to these rallies to oppose the president's attempt to pass healthcare reform legislation.
Right.
The racism was undeniable and very ugly. And that's when the movement to delegitimize his presidency really began. They started questioning his, whether he was a citizen or not, just preposterous issues.
Yes.
Questioning his faith, his religion, and it's something that, not coincidentally, they're visiting again this year as we move in the election campaign. So these are the kind of challenges that he faced, so much so that people were listening to a lot of the negative, because as you know, media tends to magnify these negative words and invective and so forth, so that people forget about some of his achievements.
Right.
I think it was a monumental achievement to prevent this country from sliding into a full-fledged depression,
yes,
which I think would actually have occurred. But even then, had he not got the support of a few, I think it was 2 or 3 Republican lawmakers, they never would have succeeded in passing the legislation to allow the stimulus money
to proceed, yes,
to become available. And of course, as we know now in retrospect, that has saved, at least most economists have said this, it saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. It created some new jobs. It prevented the layoffs of teachers and a lot of public employees. And then, of course, it enabled the administration to rescue Detroit and the auto industry. And now the auto industry is hiring again. It's making record profits, billions of dollars. Under ordinary circumstances, you would expect this to be something that is highlighted consistently on the front pages of major newspapers. Healthcare legislation eventually passed. It's been relatively watered down, but I think in the long run, people will appreciate it when they start seeing the benefits. It reminds me of major legislation such as Social Security, and I mean, in the beginning, these kind of major legislations were resisted,
yes,
and ridiculed. But then in time, who today would dare say that we ought to do away
benefit from it
with Social Security?
Right.
Yeah. But at the same time, I have to point out that in terms of the administration's policy toward Africa, it leaves much to be desired.
Okay.
I think the president had an excellent, made an excellent speech when he was in Ghana.
Right.
And basically, I think ordinary people felt empowered when he said the days of the big man is over in Africa.
Right.
Yield power to the next generation, and let's not focus on individuals anymore. Let's build institutions of state that will always endure.
Right.
So I think that was an excellent message. But I think when you see some of the kind of so-called leaders that we support on the African continent, it contradicts the message that the president delivered, which I think was an excellent message. And one of the most destructive leaders that the United States supports on the continent is Uganda's president, Yoweri Museveni, who is an authoritarian ruler, who is a dictator, who has managed to steal the last 3 elections